Turron Davenport covers the Eagles for USA Today Eagles Wire, and he has up his things to watch for tomorrow night. So you want to go check that out over at USA Today Eagles Wire. Turron, how you doing today?
Hey, what's going on? How's everything?
Yeah, everything's going good, man. So let's get into this. Jordan Matthews is gone. So that means there's some changes here on the offense, how Carson Wentz is going to adjust, how the team is going to adjust. And as you mentioned in your piece over at Eagles Wire, we get to see our first look at Alshon Jeffrey. So talk a little bit about, what you're going to expect to see, because I think this is going to be a bit of a learning curve for everybody involved.
It's going to be a bit of a learning curve primarily for Carson, to be honest with you. When talking to him about Jordan Matthews not being there, you could tell that he was emotionally hurt about the situation. And you look at that game against the Packers, he had 4 pass attempts. 3 of them went to who? Jordan Matthews. Mm-hmm. And they were in key situations, to extend the chain. So it's definitely going to be not as much a learning curve, but more of a resettling kind of situation for him. But fortunately for Carson Wentz, he has Trey Burton. And Trey Burton, if you look down the stretch, he had an increased number of targets as well as Zach Ertz. And these are guys that they're going to use in a slot position. You're going to see them flex a little bit more. Trey Burton especially, I think he's the one that really benefits from Jordan Matthews being traded. And they want to get that big body there in the middle of the field and take advantage of Burton's playmaking ability in that way, his ability to be trusted. He's a guy that Carson told me when I talked to him about Burton. He told me that he trusts him. He knows that he's going to understand coverages and know where he needs to be. And that allows Carson to throw the spot. So now the timing of it is really good. But then at the same time, Nelson Agholor gives a different aspect from the slot, a more explosive aspect, a guy who could stretch the field a little bit more and just get you yards after the catch. So it's just a different dynamic that they're going to have more often because Nelson's going to be the starting slot. But you'll see Trey Burton, you'll see Ertz. And then don't forget about Donnell Pumphrey as well as Mac Hollins from time to time in the slot.
I'm glad you mentioned Burton because I was talking about earlier the fact that, we see Agholor is the starting slot guy right now, but there's a possibility that we will see more of those 2 tight end formations, allowing Burton and Ertz to be on each side. And also, guys like you have mentioned that in the camps, like the mini camp and training camp, they have Pumphrey and Sproles on the field together as well. So it may not always be the pure 3-receiver spread on third down situations.
No, it's not always going to be the typical 3 wideouts, that type of situation, the 11 personnel. You're going to see some different looks. And one of the things that they worked on after the Matthews trade, you actually saw them doing a lot of trips. And you had Torrey Smith as the number 2 to the trip side. And with that, Torrey Smith was running a go route, and they used that to stretch the field, right? You have Nelson as number 3. So number 1 is Alshon, number 2 is Torrey, number 3 is Nelson. And they run a bit of a route combo. Torrey Smith, we know, is extremely fast, and he's a guy that will put pressure on a safety and cause him to bail out. So what they did was they had Torrey run the go route. The first play that they worked out of that formation, Carson threw a deep ball to Torrey, right? So then a few plays later, they came back to it. Torrey Smith ran the clear out, and it made Alshon wide open on the dig route. So there's things working that they'll be able to use in order to make themselves a bit more dangerous as a team. That being said, when you're taking away a guy like Jordan Matthews, who has the locker room presence that he has and just the reliability on third downs, it's definitely going to hurt. But those are some of the ways they'll be able to make up for it.
I posed this question a couple days ago to somebody else. I'm going to ask you the same about Carson Wentz. Do you think that Jordan Matthews still would have been traded if this was Wentz's 4th, 6th, or 8th year, considering the close relationship those two had? Do you think they still would have traded Jordan Matthews?
That's a really good question. That's a very good question. I would. That's really tough. And all things remaining equal, whereas you have the need for a cornerback, and that. Wow. I think they would have made that trade, to be honest with you, just because when you look at being able to get a guy like Ronald Darby, a young corner that could play the way he does, I think they would have made that move. And just the fact that they made it without even saying anything to Carson first, even though we're talking about year 2, I think that says that they would have done what they felt was best for the team, regardless of what Carson wanted.
Talk with Turron Davenport, covers the Eagles for USA Today, Eagles Wire. You can follow him on Twitter at @TDavenport _NFL. Turron, looking overall at the offense, you talked about Burton, you talked about Jeffrey. Who are some of the other guys, and we know about Aguilar, but who are some of the other guys on this offense that you're really looking forward to make an imprint on this game tomorrow night? Because last week we saw Bryce Treggs put up the nice numbers. We saw Matt Collins have the great play where he shoved 2 guys, Packers defensive faces, into the turf. Who are some of the guys that you're looking at and saying, I want to see you do more?
Yeah, I think Corey Clement is a guy that definitely you want to see more of. He's actually been very impressive this camp. When I watched him at Wisconsin, I got the idea of or the picture of the guy being more of a plotter, a big running back that just kind of was a glutton for punishment. But he hits the hole really well. He has shiftiness. There's no wasted movement, whereas he's never going east and west. He's always upfield with his cuts. So he's someone I would like to see. And with that, I don't think it's right to only give the rushing attack 16 attempts. And Peterson said that the game took him to a certain place, away from the running game, which, to me, it's a preseason game. You work on what you need to work on. And you can't duplicate those live reps like you can in the run during a game. So I think they need to stick to that. So, yeah, Corey Clement. Another guy I would like to see more of is Shelton Gibson. He's a guy that had the yips initially, but he's come along and he's catching everything. So I want to see him continue to acquit himself as a legit prospect and a guy who will challenge. Cornerback-wise, C.J. Smith, I want to see him rebound. And I'm really excited to see this 3-safety formation that they've been using more and more, and that's Corey Graham and Rodney McLeod in 2 deep and Malcolm Jenkins in the box. So those are some of the things I'll be looking for.
You mentioned the 3-safety alignment. How do you think they're going to set that up zone-wise with the other defensive backs? Because we know sometimes teams like to do those overlapping zones. One guy goes intermediate, one guy goes deep, and they kind of angle the third guy in between the two. Do you think that could be the setup a bit for how they'll do with that?
Well, it's pretty interesting what you're seeing them do. You'll see them start out in a 2-deep look, and then at the pre-snap, Corey Graham will drop down and Rodney McLeod will rotate into single high. You also see him starting out in the box and rotating back to 2 deep. The thing that really dictates everything is Ronald Darby, because having Ronald Darby, a guy who could turn and run with any receiver, now you don't always have to have that help over top. So you're not always forced to be in that 2 deep, whereas you have to help the right side and the left side. That's the advantage. So I don't know if you'll see them overlap as much. I think you're going to see more, and this idea has been visited by Schwartz, something he's contemplating, the cat coverage, where you have him just stick with the opposing team's top receiver. So it's going to be a different world, so to speak, now that you got Darby in there as opposed to Patrick Robinson.
You mentioned Darby. A lot of people are excited to see him make his debut. When he was asked by you guys, the media, about how does he feel about going against the receivers, he said, hell yeah. He seems very excited, not just to be on this Eagles team, but to be able to compete against the kind of guys the Eagles have in practice.
Yeah, he's excited, and you see him lining up mostly against Torrey Smith, and he's lining up right there on the line and turning and running with him down the field step by step. You see him fighting Alshon Jeffrey for some of the high passes, the contested ones. Alshon has caught a couple on him. But the other thing you see is it's the confidence. Anytime you have a corner that's willing to, dig in and click and close on a slant in goal line type situations, that's confidence. And he almost came up with an interception on goal line the other day, and those are the things that I like from him. He's confident. He's willing to, take that risk, knowing you have to cover, that if you don't get there to intercept that's touchdown, or if they decide to run a double move, that's touchdown. You don't have the safety over top with some of the ways that they were running a goal line double slant situation. So it's really just a confidence thing with him and trusting himself. He never panics also. So, yeah, I mean, naturally he's going to want to go up against the best. He didn't say he 100% had to be the guy used in cat covers, but he would welcome it. And he touched on his days back in Buffalo. Recently he's been working at right corner. Last year he worked at left, but that allows him to work both sides. So that way if he has to travel, he's fully capable of doing it.
When I spoke to Mike Rodak, who covers the Bills for ESPN, he said he thinks part of the reason why Darby was traded wasn't just because that they wanted a third-round pick in Jordan Matthews, the Bills, but because of also that Darby, because he's such a good man corner, didn't really fit their zone scheme. So do you think that Darby coming in here was the perfect fit for what the Eagles needed, considering the lack of talent depth at the cornerback position?
Mike is right. And that typical 3-deep Carolina Panthers look that McDermott brings, it doesn't really accentuate Darby's skill set, right? You could get away with a corner that doesn't have the best man skills in that 3-deep type of look. So value-wise, Darby was going to be a little more expensive than what he should have been in that scheme, if you kind of follow what I mean, in a couple of years when it's time for him to be up. So, yeah, I think coming here, it's the ultimate fit for him because this is an aggressive defense. This is a defense that puts you out on the island, and that's something that you have to have confidence to be out on the island, and you have to have that aggressive, that go get 'em type of attitude to be on the island and play in that man coverage. And the thing that's interesting with Darby is he could be disruptive at the line without even touching the receiver. The way his footwork is and how he could jump inside of a receiver when he tries to get inside, it really is interesting watching him redirect receivers without touching them. And that's just because he has quick feet. So, yeah, it's a perfect match for him in Jim Schwartz's scheme. Because you're going to have some zone concepts as well, but he's able to be more aggressive and just cover, and that's the thing that he loves to do. So by all means, a great fit.
Looking overall at the defense, we saw Derek Barnett last week have a very good game, and to me that was significant, Turron, because you saw another first-round pick, Taco Charlton, look really rough against the Cardinals in his first game. He bounced back his second game, but he still didn't look like a first-round pick, whereas Derek Barnett in his very first game against the Packers, I understand it wasn't the Packers at 100%, but for a rookie like him to come in and make that kind of impact with the 2 sacks, the 2 quarterback hits, stuffing the run, shows me that everything that they've been saying about him in training camp is all true and more, that he is something special.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Barnett and Taco Charlton, that's like looking at a Chevy Impala and a Mercedes E-Class. There's a clear difference between the two. And I don't mean to rag on Taco Charlton, but Derek Barnett is in a whole different class. And what you saw him do against Jason Spriggs, a guy who has NFL starts, he was able to use that inside move. And that's something to really hang your hat on, because now this is a guy who has clearly the best bend and best ability to get off the edge and get to the quarterback in the draft class. Now you see him developing something else to counter move off of that. And by the way, he has a spin move that he's been working on for 2 years with Chuck Smith in Atlanta and has worked on with Jason Peters after practice and training camp. So my thing is this: when you look at Jason Peters, Lane Johnson, these are 2 of the best offensive linemen in the league, and these are 2 guys that Barnett is going against every day. So what happens when you get to Sundays? You're going against someone who's probably worse than the 2, and now it's almost like driving on a smooth road as opposed to a bumpy one. You're always going to do better on it. So I expect to see a lot from Derek Barnett as the season goes on. I am saying I would take over 6.5 sacks from him. That's what I see. And you just see the hands. You see them dropping it. He's not only rushing the passer. There was another play on that where Steven Means and Aaron Grimes got a sack, and that was on the strength of his ability to drop back and shut down the crossing route and make the quarterback tuck the ball back down. See, that's something else you got to give him credit for. As a rookie, dropping back in coverage as a defensive end, I mean, that's impressive. Derek Barnett is the real deal. He's the total package as a pass rusher, and that was an awesome move for them to get him at number 14.
How do you think the Eagles are going to use these pass rushers? Because we know Brandon Graham's one of the starters. Vinny Curry had a rough year last year. We know Chris Long's pedigree. We've seen Barnett, and you mentioned Steven Means. So how do you think they're going to rotate these guys? Because we saw last year, Jim Schwartz does like to rotate the linemen.
Yeah, you're going to see a heavy rotation. And, to be honest with you, it's going to be a lot similar. If you think back to 2011, the San Francisco 49ers, they had a guy out of Missouri, the number 7 pick in that draft, and that was Aldon Smith. And they already had a starter at outside linebacker at Paris Harrison. So Harrison got the starts, but Aldon Smith played more. That's what you're going to see as we get later in the season, like week 4, week 5 and on. You're going to see Vinny Curry. They're going to give him his respect and keep him as a starter. But pass rushing situations, you're going to see Derek Barnett on the field. In addition to that, Steven Means is a guy that's going to be in the rotation, and what a lot of people aren't reporting is they're using him at D tackle as well. So this is another way to, obviously he's not going to do that in run situations, but their NASCAR package, they feature Steven Means at times, they feature Vinny Curry at times also, whereas they take Jernigan off the field and they put Means or Curry in and have him next to Fletcher Cox. So there'll be a rotation. For the most part, at left defensive end, you have Brandon Graham and then Chris Long. Right side, you have Curry and then Derek Barnett. And then you're also seeing Steven Means at both sides as well as D tackle. So that's the rotation. They'll find snaps for them. And don't be surprised when you see Fletcher Cox lining up at defensive end as well. So they're going to do a lot of different things just to mix it up, to give these guys more reps, to give different looks on defense. It's all about generating that pass rush with the front four. So that's why you're going to see so many different ways to do that.
Talking with Turron Davenport here on 97.3 ESPN. He covers the Eagles for USA Today. You can follow him on Twitter at @TDavenport_NFL. Turron, staying in the trenches, we knew last year Lane Johnson on the field, Eagles 5-1. Without him, they're 2-8. So he makes a big difference. Jason Peters, I think, is still better than half the left tackles in the league. So we know what he brings to the table. Isaac Seumalo, looks like they're trying to plug him in at left guard. Brandon Brooks, game right guard. But I'm still frustrated with Jason Kelce. In that game against the Packers, he just looked like he did not have the burst or the explosion needed from his position. I'm getting worried that the Eagles keep telling us how smart he is and how athletic he is, and they keep singing about his athleticism and his intelligence, but if you don't have the explosion on the snap and you don't have the power, isn't all the other stuff kind of useless?
Well, I think with Kelce, the major thing is his ability to stop that interior pass rush. Because I don't care what quarterback it is, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, you name them, Joe Montana, whoever you want to bring up, none of them like the pocket being pushed back into their lap. And that's what happened a few times last year and caused Carson to kind of get away from his natural throwing motion and following through on his throws, because you don't want to hit your hand on the center's helmet, because that's an easy way to break your hand and be out for the rest of the year. So that's really the major issue. You look at some of the interceptions that went through, it was because that interior pressure was coming that way. So when they go against the bigger zero techniques, this year, you got some on the schedule, even not just zero techniques, but just defensive tackles, period. Damon Harrison, is a guy that stands out. When you're going against these bigger, stronger guys, you have to be able to anchor down and not give up that ground and get walked back to the quarterback. And that, to me, is Kelce's sole problem. I still like him getting out on the edge and blocking and, the outside zone game and blocking on screens and those type of situations. He still does that very well, but it's just that Achilles is that interior pass rush. And that's where you kind of – Steven Wisniewski is out there, and he's a guy that I think he's going to play this year, because if Kelce gives up that interior pressure the way he did last year, they can't allow Carson's development to be hindered by always having the pocket pushed back in his lap. So one of the things that I'm looking for is just at some point, I think Wisniewski might be able to get some reps at center and take over for a guy that they're going to move on from eventually. I think this is probably Kelce's last year. And Kelce's a great dude. He's a great guy in the locker room. He's really good with Carson and diagnosing the pass rush and what's happening and communicating. But you know what? You can't give up that interior pressure.
And also, hasn't Howie Roseman and Doug Peterson talked about that they view Isaac Seumalo as the starter at center in the future? So couldn't we see eventually Seumalo being the center?
Yeah, Seumalo could end up as the center as well. I think one of the things you have to look at, though, is that they paid Wisniewski starting money, right? So they have options, though, and that's what Howie wanted to do. He wanted to get deep at the offensive line, invest in the trenches. So you have a guy in Chance Warmack that could play left or right side. I don't trust him as much in pass blocking, but run blocking, that guy's a bulldozer. He'll move buildings for you, So that's something else. They move Seumalo to center. Now you could bring in Chance at left guard. Another guy that could play left guard that a lot of people aren't talking about is Dallas Thomas. He's really good in pass protection. So he was a starter for the Dolphins last year. I don't know why they didn't bring him back, but that's another guy in the mix. So it's really going to depend on what direction they want to go. But one way or another, I think this may be, a quicker ending than a lot of people think for Kelce, and I'm talking this year.
Turron, real quick before I let you go, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show today. I have a quarterback theory, and my quarterback theory is we know Carson's the starter, Nick Foles is the backup. I think Matt McGloin is playing for a shot on the roster because Trey Burton has played quarterback in college. Greg Ward, whether he makes the roster or not, played quarterback in college. They can be your emergency quarterbacks. You might not need that third quarterback traditionally as teams have had on the depth chart. So McGloin, if you look at how he played last week, and if he doesn't play as well this week, he may be playing his way off the roster.
Yeah, I don't think McGloin is going to be on the roster, and that's if he goes 40 for 41 for the rest of the preseason. I can't see him being on the roster. They don't have the luxury of keeping three. They could go 6 deep at receiver. They'll probably have to go 6 deep at receiver, 4 deep at running back. We already talked about 5 defensive ends. Alex McAllister is also playing well. So what do you do there? You look at defensive tackle. They could go 4 deep there. All the corners, all the safeties are going to keep. I say all that to say they can't afford to keep a number 3 quarterback. Matt McGloin is almost certainly going to be released when they go down to the 53-man. And I could see Dane Evans, who's actually looked better than Matt McGloin. I could see him sticking as a practice squad guy, and that'll give them someone they could pull up in a pinch for a week if they have to, have a different backup quarterback. That's the way I look at it. I think you're going to see corners in the back end, like an Aaron Grimes, C.J. Smith, go off and on the roster as one of their shuffle spots in case they have to move in and have a third quarterback active. But not even active on the roster. I don't see Matt McGloin being that guy. And they let him throw the ball 40 times in a preseason game, which is absurd. But you saw the results, and McGloin has had better days, and I think he's going to end up elsewhere.
He is Turron Davenport. You can follow him on Twitter at @Davenport_NFL. He is the guy who covers the Eagles Wire with USA Today. Turron, really appreciate the time today and all the great insights.
No problem. Thank you.